Welcome back to Golden Blue, everybody, and if you are a college football fan, a die-hard college football fan, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. That's all we do here, videos of college football every single day. And don't forget, now you can send me stuff. Finally got a P.O. box. Send gear to represent your team on my back wall every single video and live show. Here's the address you send it to. P.O. Box 360, Liberty, South Carolina, 29657. Oh boy. Just like the heat on Scott Frost's hot seat was turned up to broil after the loss to Northwestern, the pressure for the pressure cooker on the Pac-12 has been jumped up as well. The Big 12 has decided to start talks early with ESPN and Fox, and ESPN and Fox have obliged. That's right, they're talking about the new TV deal, or at least an extension of the current TV deal, a year and a half before this deal is even up. This could put some major pressure on the Pac-12. And from what I'm hearing, the purpose of this is for the Big 12 to be able to give actual numbers to the Four Corner schools, because they are most definitely wanting to add the Four Corner schools, and the Four Corner schools are interested in the Big 12. They just want to be able to approach them with actual numbers. Special shout out to David Hackett. He's a great subscriber of Golden Blue Dude. He kind of laid out a game plan, point by point, very good. Gives what we already know and what it could lead to, and I agree with this, and I'll add a little bit to it. So I'm going to give you what we know, facts that we know right now, and what that could lead to. And I'm talking about all Power 5 conferences, not just Pac-12, not just the Big 12. First up, the Pac-12. It is a fact. Oregon and Washington have 100% reached out to the Big Ten about joining the Big Ten. And we also heard that representatives of Oregon met representatives of the Big Ten in Chicago. But the Commissioner Kevin Warren, nor the President of Oregon, nor the Athletic Director of Oregon were involved in that meeting or talks, whatever you want to call it. What I do know now is that Phil Knight, the owner of Nike, was the representative for Oregon in the meeting in Chicago with the Big Ten to determine Oregon's compatibility with the Big Ten. Man, Phil Knight is grabbing the bull by the horns. He is literally trying to force Oregon into the Big Ten. Although I don't think it's going to be that much of a force. I think the Big Ten wants Oregon and Washington. Here's the catch. Small hitch, small catch. From what I'm hearing, the Big Ten is saying nobody else is getting an equal revenue as far as shares from the Big Ten. So that means they can bring in Oregon and Washington, but they're not going to get equal shares as everybody else. They're going to get lower shares than everybody else. But hey, they're still safe, and they're still going to make way more money than what they make in the Pac-12. So they are still going to take that deal. Now, I will say there's one caveat to this, and that's Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame is the one team that would still get full revenue share if they join the Big Ten. So yeah, it does look like Oregon and Washington will join the Big Ten for less money, but still a lot more money than the Pac-12. Now, the Big Ten also is looking at 2 ACC schools, and this is per Dennis Dodd and Brent McMurphy. And here's where it gets really interesting. Their biggest interests are in North Carolina and Virginia. Remember, what were the first 4 schools that the SEC wanted out of the ACC? North Carolina, Virginia, Clemson, and Florida State. Now, all this gets thrown up against the wall, and that wall is the ACC grant of rights, so that has to get figured out. And from what I understand, it takes 8 members to vote to dissolve the ACC, and boom, the grant of rights go away, no more ACC. So that has to get figured out. The number has to get to 8 for anybody to leave, because nobody is paying $500 million per school for them to come to their conference. It's just not happening. That's $1 billion per every 2 schools. And that's kind of a conflict of interest for ESPN and Fox / the SEC and Big Ten, because they both want North Carolina and Virginia. But there are other options for the SEC, and we will get to that. The ACC will also look to add 4 more teams. Of course, I already talked about North Carolina, Virginia, Florida State, and Clemson. Well, it looks like North Carolina and Virginia are actually more interested in the Big Ten. So if that happens, what does the SEC do? Well, first, they take Florida State. And Florida State has already reached out to the SEC and filled out an application. That is done. Now, the second team would be Clemson, who has spoken to the ACC. No application has been filled out or anything like that, but they have spoken to the SEC. And of course, the SEC does want Clemson. Now, if Virginia and North Carolina go to the Big Ten, that's when the SEC looks at the Big 12. And the first team that they would add, whether you want to believe this or not, I have heard this from multiple sources, West Virginia is the biggest rumor as far as the first team to come out of the Big 12 for the SEC to select. And from what I'm hearing, West Virginia has spoken to the SEC. Now, there's a couple other clues that might point in that direction. The first one, head coach Neil Brown. the head coach for the West Virginia Mountaineers football team, was on the Marty and McGee show on the SEC network. Okay, that's interesting. Doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it's interesting. But also, West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, along with Senator Tommy Tuberville, are working with the SEC on a bill to tackle NIL. Now, in and of itself, those things don't really mean that much, but when you put it all together, it really does look like West Virginia has been talking to the SEC, and maybe the Big Ten gets Virginia and North Carolina, and that's when the SEC looks towards the Big 12, brings in West Virginia, and then the fourth team would be Oklahoma State. Now, that's coming from 247 Sports. They strongly believe that the second school would be Oklahoma State. Makes a lot of sense. They're already bringing in Oklahoma, so bringing in Oklahoma State, you pretty much lock down the state of Oklahoma. That's a great TV state, a great TV market. That's a good addition for the SEC. I definitely can buy into that. So this all hinges on where North Carolina and Virginia would end up. So if North Carolina and Virginia do, in fact, choose the Big Ten, that's when the SEC would turn their attention to the Big 12 and grab West Virginia and Oklahoma State. Pretty high chances of that happening, because from what I'm hearing, North Carolina and Virginia would prefer the Big Ten because of the elite status of AAU schools and all the academic standards that they have up there. And North Carolina and Virginia consider themselves elite academic schools. And if you look up their academic scores, yeah, they back it up. So they fit well into the Big Ten. Geographically, not that big of a stretch. I know they're right smack dab in the middle of SEC country as well, but they fit well into the Big Ten. Probably would make a little bit more money in the Big Ten as well. So that's a thing that is going to be interesting to see in the future if, number one, they figure out how to break the grant of rights, and number two, the Big Ten and the SEC are fighting over North Carolina and Virginia. Where do they go? Now, for the Big 12, this is the biggest thing that I'm hearing about the Big 12. In the next 30 to 45 days, especially the later part of those 30 to 45 days, the Big 12 is expected to take the four corner schools: Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado. Once again, that's why they're trying to talk to ESPN and Fox early about their TV deals, so they can give them numbers, so they can know for sure, hey, you're going to make a ton more money here in the Big 12 over the Pac-12. And of course, that would help replace West Virginia and Oklahoma State. But the Big 12 isn't going to be satisfied with 14 members. You lose 2, that's 10. You gain 4, that's 14. They're actually going to look to be adding more teams after that. They want to get to 20 as well. So the schools they'll be looking at after that is possibly some more Pac-12 teams as far as Cal and Stanford. I don't know if they could grab them. They're not going to be looking at Oregon State or Washington State. Sorry guys, that's just not going to happen. The only 2 other options would be Cal or Stanford. But beyond that, they would also look at the AAC from Memphis, who's pouring $200 million into their football stadium. They have a great Tennessee TV market. They would fit well into the Big 12 geography. And the Big 12 would be looking into another AAC school, unnamed, but that school could be South Florida, for a travel partner for UCF. So that would make sense for UCF and help them out a little bit. And South Florida is in Tampa. That's a decent potential TV market. So there are some pluses to South Florida, but they need to be better in college football though. And then on top of that, they will add 2 more members in the future to get to 20 teams. I don't know what direction they would look to get those last 2 members. So what does this mean for the Pac-12? A lot of bad news. It looks like the Pac-12 will have to either merge or be absorbed into the Mountain West, and it would lose its Autonomy 5 status. No longer a Power 5 conference, because I think the rule is you have to have 8 of your original members from that conference when it was a Power 5 conference in order to keep that Autonomy 5 status. So that would go away. They might be able to keep the Pac-12 name, but they will lose the Autonomy 5 status. What about the ACC? Well, it looks like the ACC will have to regroup if all this happens and figure out how to not lose any more teams and possibly merge or be absorbed into the AAC. And they also could possibly lose their Autonomy 5 status as well. This is whenever teams like Louisville, Georgia Tech, Pitt, Syracuse, Miami would have to figure out one of these other 3 Autonomy 3 conferences, Power 3 conferences, as far as a landing spot. Those are too big of brands to be left in a non-Autonomy 5 conference, and I'm sure they would find a landing spot. But under this scenario, both the Pac-12 and the ACC would be gone. And there are some facts to back this up, and the one thing that stops everything to a grinding halt is the ACC grant of rights. So that's the next thing that everybody's looking at to see if it gets figured out. If it doesn't, then the ACC is actually going to be fine until 2036. Maybe ESPN actually pours some money into the ACC and they expand. I don't know. This could go in either directions. But rest assured, ESPN has been behind these moves for the SEC for a while, for years, to get it to 20 members. In fact, ESPN has been working on this as far as Oklahoma and Texas, the new additions to the SEC, for several years. They have known that they were going to get Oklahoma and Texas or at least go after them, and they were very confident with their money, and of course, it actually happened. And they didn't tell Texas A&M till the last second because they knew they would be very, very mad. But yes, this was not a last-ditch effort to get some big-name brands. So y'all let me know in the comments section, do you think this is the direction that conference realignment goes in? No more Pac-12, no more ACC, or do you think it goes in the other direction and the ACC survives, and eventually there'll be no more Pac-12 and no more Big 12? Seriously, this could go either way, and it all depends on those grant of rights. That's all I got for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.